Ethan Montgomery's Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor of his corner office on the 52nd floor of Manhattan's most prestigious financial district. The morning sun glinted off the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. 3 monitors on his desk displayed the morning's market figures in angry red. The Dow was down 2.3%, but Ethan's lips curled into a slight smile. Market volatility meant opportunity, and opportunity was what had built his empire. "Mr. Montgomery, your 9 a.m. is here," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "And Mr. Chen from Hong Kong is holding on line 2. Ethan straightened his brioni tie, a habit he'd developed over 15 years of high-stakes negotiations. "Tell Davidson to wait 5 minutes, Sarah. I'll take Chen first." At 42, Ethan had everything he'd ever dreamed of during those hungry years at Yale Business School. The Forbes article framed on his wall dubbed him Wall Street's Golden Oracle, praising his uncanny ability to predict market trends. His personal net worth had crossed the billion-dollar mark last quarter, though few knew the cost at which that success had come. The call with Chen was brief, but productive. Another $100 million secured for their Southeast Asian expansion. As Ethan ended the call, his eyes drifted to the small silver frame hidden behind his second monitor. He usually kept it face down, but today, something made him reach for it. The photo showed a younger version of himself, arms wrapped around a woman with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile. Maya Reyes. The sight of her still made his chest tighten, even after all these years. A knock at the door forced him to put the frame back in its place. James Davidson, his head of legal, entered with a stack of documents and a concerned expression that would have been imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him as well as Ethan did. "The SEC filing is ready for your review," Davidson said, placing the documents on Ethan's desk. "But there's something else we need to discuss." Ethan gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "What is it?" "Victor Langford's team has been asking questions about Project Orion. They're digging into the 2019 acquisitions." The mention of Langford's name made Ethan's jaw clench. Victor had been a thorn in his side since their Harvard days, always second best, always trying to prove something. "Let them dig. Everything about Orion is clean." "That's just it," Davidson hesitated. "We found some irregularities in the documentation. Nothing major, but—" Ethan's phone buzzed. Another message from his mother about the upcoming charity gala. He was expected to make an appearance, donate generously, and charm the city's elite. It was all part of the carefully constructed image he'd built. But lately, the weight of maintaining that image felt heavier than ever. As he listened to Davidson outline the potential issues, Ethan's thoughts drifted to the dream he'd had last night. Maya had been in it, standing in their old Brooklyn apartment, holding something he couldn't quite see. He'd woken up with a familiar ache, the same one that appeared every time he thought about what he'd left behind in his relentless pursuit of success. "Handle it," he told Davidson, his voice carrying the authority that had become his trademark. "Whatever it costs." The Brooklyn apartment was small, but immaculate, its worn surfaces gleaming with the kind of care that comes from necessity rather than luxury. Maya Reyes stood at the kitchen counter, methodically packing 2 identical lunchboxes with the precision of someone who had perfected this routine over years. Turkey sandwiches cut diagonally, apple slices treated with lemon juice to prevent browning, and the last 2 packets of fruit snacks she'd been saving for a special occasion. "Mom, have you seen my science project?" Liam's voice carried from the bedroom he shared with his twin brother. At 12, both boys had inherited her dark curls and Ethan's sharp green eyes, a daily reminder she couldn't escape even if she wanted to. "It's on top of the refrigerator," Maya called back, glancing at the clock. 7:15 a.m. The morning rush was right on schedule. "Noah, your guitar lesson is canceled today. Mrs. Rodriguez has the flu." Noah emerged from the bathroom, his school uniform slightly rumpled. "Can I stay at the library instead? There's this book on classical composition." "Not today, mi amor. I need you both to come straight to the center after school. We're short-staffed, and the food bank delivery is coming." Maya's thoughts drifted to 12 years ago as she watched her sons prepare for school. She'd been 24, fresh out of social work school, when she'd met Ethan at a community fundraiser. He wasn't the polished Wall Street titan then, just an ambitious young analyst with dreams bigger than his bank account, and a smile that made her forget her own name. The memory of their last fight still burned clear as yesterday. Their tiny studio apartment, the one they'd thought was temporary, had seemed even smaller that night. The walls had practically vibrated with their angry words. "It's a temporary position, Maya. 2 years in Hong Kong, 3 at most. The bonus alone would set us up for life. I'm pregnant, Ethan. I need you here, not halfway across the world chasing some dream that might never happen." She hadn't told him about the twins then. The news of her pregnancy was fresh, and the doctor had only confirmed she was carrying twins the day before. She'd planned to surprise him that weekend, had even bought 2 tiny onesies. But then came the job offer, and everything unraveled like a sweater caught on a nail. "Mrs. Reyes?" A voice pulled her back to the present. Marco, the building superintendent, stood in her doorway. "The heating's acting up again. I can take a look after my shift ends." Maya nodded gratefully. "Gracias, Marco. The boys' room is the worst. They've been using extra blankets." After Marco left, she found herself staring at the small box she kept on the top shelf of her closet. Inside were the ultrasound pictures, the unworn onesies, and a stack of newspaper clippings chronicling Ethan's rise to financial stardom. She'd stopped collecting them years ago, but sometimes, during her weakest moments, she would Google his name, watching through a digital window as he lived the life he'd chosen, instead of the one they could have had together. Victor Langford sat in his sleek midtown office, a predatory smile playing on his lips as he reviewed the latest report from his investigative team. The view from his window wasn't quite as impressive as Ethan Montgomery's, a fact that never failed to irritate him. But soon, he thought, that would change. "Mr. Langford," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Reeves is here to see you." "Send him in," Victor replied, straightening his tie and schooling his features into a mask of calm authority. Thomas Reeves, a former SEC investigator now working for Victor's firm, entered the office with a thick folder tucked under his arm. "We've got something, sir," he said, barely containing his excitement. "Project Orion isn't as clean as Montgomery claims." Victor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Show me." As Reeves laid out the documents, pointing out discrepancies in dates, questionable transfers, and suspiciously timed stock purchases, Victor felt a surge of triumph. This was it, the chink in Ethan Montgomery's armor he'd been searching for all these years. "Excellent work, Reeves," Victor said, already formulating his next move. "Get me a meeting with the SEC. It's time to turn up the heat on our old friend Ethan." Across town, Ethan was facing his own crisis. The charity gala, usually a tedious but necessary evil, had turned into a PR disaster. A reporter had cornered him, asking pointed questions about Montgomery Financial's involvement in gentrification projects that were displacing low-income families in Brooklyn. "Mr. Montgomery, is it true that your company's investments have led to the eviction of over 500 families in the past year alone?" the reporter had asked, her microphone thrust into his face. Ethan had managed to deflect, offering platitudes about urban renewal and economic growth, but the damage was done. As he left the gala, he could feel the disapproving glares of the city's elite burning into his back. Now, sitting in the back of his town car as it crawled through late-night traffic, Ethan felt the walls closing in. His phone buzzed incessantly. Davidson warning about potential SEC inquiries, his PR team scrambling to control the narrative, his mother expressing her disappointment in his handling of the gala. As the car turned onto the street where his penthouse stood, Ethan's eyes were drawn to a figure huddled in a doorway. For a moment, he thought he saw Maya's face, gaunt and tired, staring back at him. He blinked, and the illusion vanished, but the unease remained. "Stop the car," he ordered his driver. Ignoring the man's protests about the late hour in the neighborhood, Ethan stepped out onto the sidewalk. The figure was gone, but as he stood there, the cool night air biting at his face, he felt a sudden, overwhelming need to see Maya and the boys, to make sure they were okay. Before he could talk himself out of it, Ethan pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for Maya Reyes. Maya Reyes trudged up the stairs to her apartment, her body aching from a long day at Harbor Hearts Community Center. The center had been her lifeline for the past decade, a place where she could make a difference while providing for her boys. But lately, even that sanctuary felt threatened. As she fumbled for her keys, she noticed an eviction notice taped to her door. Her heart sank. She'd been dreading this moment for months, ever since the new management company had taken over the building. Gentrification was sweeping through the neighborhood like a tidal wave, and families like hers were being washed away. Inside, Liam and Noah were huddled over the kitchen table, lost in their respective passions. Liam was tinkering with a small robot he'd built from scraps, while Noah's fingers danced over the strings of his battered acoustic guitar. The sight of them, so focused and unaware of the storm gathering around them, made Maya's chest tighten. "Mijos," she called softly, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "How was your day?" Both boys looked up, their faces lighting up at the sight of her, but their smiles faded as they noticed the paper in her hand. "Is that—" Liam started, his eyes widening. Maya nodded, her throat tight. "We need to talk." As she explained their situation, Maya watched the range of emotions play across her sons' faces: fear, anger, determination. They were so much like their father in that moment. It almost took her breath away. "We'll figure it out, Mom," Noah said, reaching for her hand. "We always do." Maya squeezed his hand, wishing she shared his optimism. As she looked at her boys, now on the cusp of adolescence, she couldn't help but think of Ethan. Would he even recognize them if he saw them now? Would he care about the struggles they faced? Little did she know, at that very moment, Ethan Montgomery was staring at his phone, his finger hovering over Maya's name in his search results. Ethan's town car crawled through the Brooklyn streets, each turn taking him further from the gleaming towers of Manhattan and deeper into a world he'd left behind long ago. The GPS on his phone guided him to an address he'd found after an hour of searching online Harbor Hearts Community Center. As the car pulled up to the curb, Ethan's eyes widened. The center was housed in a rundown building, its faded sign barely legible in the early morning light. A small group of people was already gathered outside, waiting for the doors to open. "Wait here," Ethan told his driver, stepping out of the car. He approached the building cautiously, feeling acutely out of place in his tailored suit. As he neared the entrance, he heard a familiar voice that made his heart skip a beat. "Good morning, everyone. We'll be opening up in just a few minutes. Remember, the food bank is first come, first served, so please be patient." Maya stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, her smile warm and encouraging despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. She looked older, of course, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 12 years ago. But to Ethan, she was as beautiful as ever. He hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. What right did he have to come here, to disrupt the life she'd built without him? But before he could retreat, Maya's eyes met his, and the world seemed to stop. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the spell was broken by a commotion near the front of the line. "Hey, no cutting!" someone shouted. Maya snapped back to attention, hurrying to defuse the situation. Ethan watched as she deftly handled the dispute, her voice firm but kind. This was a side of her he'd never seen, confident, authoritative, respected. As the doors opened and people began to file in, Maya turned back to Ethan. I have to take care of this," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "But we should talk. Can you wait?" Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as Maya disappeared into the building, leaving him standing on the sidewalk, feeling more lost than he had in years. Inside Harbor Hearts, Maya's mind raced as she went through the motions of overseeing the food bank distribution. Ethan's sudden appearance had thrown her completely off balance. What was he doing here? How had he found her? And most importantly, what did he want? As she handed out bags of groceries and checked names off her list, she couldn't help but glance towards the door, half expecting Ethan to have disappeared like a mirage. But every time she looked, he was still there, standing awkwardly to the side, looking so out of place in his expensive suit that it would have been comical if it wasn't so surreal. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself drawn into conversation with some of the center's regulars. An elderly woman told him about the art classes Maya had started, which had given her a reason to get out of her apartment each week. A young man proudly showed off the resume he'd created in the center's computer lab, explaining how Maya had helped him land his first job interview in years. With each story, Ethan felt a growing sense of awe and shame. While he'd been chasing billions, Maya had been here, changing lives one person at a time. As the crowd began to thin, Maya approached Ethan, her face a carefully composed mask. "We can talk in my office," she said, leading him to a small room off the main hall. The office was cluttered but organized, every inch of space utilized efficiently. Crayon drawings covered one wall, clearly the work of children, including two that Ethan suspected might be from his own sons. "Why are you here, Ethan?" Maya asked as soon as the door closed behind them. Ethan took a deep breath. I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "I saw something last night that made me think of you, and I needed to know you were okay." Maya's eyebrows rose. "Okay? Is that what you think we are?" Before Ethan could respond, the door burst open and two boys tumbled in, their excited chatter dying as they noticed the stranger in the room. "Mom?" the slightly taller one asked, his eyes darting between Maya and Ethan. Ethan's heart stopped as he looked at the boys. Green eyes, his eyes stared back at him from two faces that were unmistakably a blend of him and Maya. "Are these?" he whispered, unable to finish the question. Maya's protective instincts flared. "Liam, Noah, this is an old friend, Mr. Montgomery. He was just leaving." But Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the twins. "I have sons," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The boys looked confused, but a spark of recognition flashed in Liam's eyes. "Wait, Montgomery? Like the guy in those old pictures Mom keeps?" Maya felt her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. She'd tried so hard to keep her past separate from her children's present, but now it was all colliding in the most public way possible. "We should talk," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, Maya." She wanted to refuse, to send him back to his world of high finance and leave her family in peace. But the pleading look in his eyes, so at odds with the confident tycoon she'd seen in news clips, made her hesitate. "Fine," she said finally. "Boys, go help Mrs. Rodriguez with the inventory. I'll be there in a minute." As Liam and Noah reluctantly left the office, Maya turned to face the man she'd once thought she'd spend her life with. "You have 5 minutes, Ethan. Make them count." Ethan's 5 minutes stretched into an hour as he and Maya talked, their conversation a painful dance of explanations, accusations, and long-buried emotions. The boys, curious about the stranger who had disrupted their routine, kept finding excuses to pass by the office, earning stern looks from their mother each time. "I had no idea, Maya," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "If I had known about the twins." "You would have what?" Maya interrupted, her eyes flashing. "Stayed? Sent checks from Hong Kong? We both know you were gone long before you actually left." Ethan flinched at the truth in her words. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the sound of raised voices from the main hall interrupted him. Maya was on her feet in an instant, rushing out to find two men in expensive suits talking to Mrs. Rodriguez, who looked close to tears. "What's going on here?" Maya demanded, positioning herself between the elderly volunteer and the newcomers. One of the men, a smug smile on his face, held up a document. "We're here on behalf of Montgomery Development. This building has been slated for demolition to make way for a new luxury apartment complex. We're serving notice that all operations here must cease within 30 days. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "Montgomery Development," she repeated, turning to look at Ethan, who had followed her out of the office. Ethan's expression was one of genuine shock. "There must be some mistake," he began, but the smugger of the two men cut him off. "Mr. Montgomery, we didn't expect to see you here, sir. I assure you, everything is proceeding according to plan. Your signature is right here on the acquisition papers." As the man held out the document, Ethan caught sight of his own signature at the bottom. The memory hit him like a physical blow, signing a stack of papers Davidson had brought him, too distracted by other concerns to pay much attention to the details. The look of betrayal on Maya's face was unbearable. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "All of you. Now." As the developers left, looking confused by the tension in the room, Ethan tried to explain. "Maya, I swear I didn't know. I'll fix this. I promise." But Maya was already turning away, her focus on calming Mrs. Rodriguez and the other volunteers who had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Ethan stood there, feeling more lost than ever, watching as Maya expertly managed the crisis he had unwittingly created. It was clear that his presence was only making things worse. With a heavy heart, he turned to leave, only to find himself face to face with Liam and Noah. The boys looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You're really our dad, aren't you?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Noah, always the more emotional of the two, suddenly threw his arms around Ethan's waist. After a moment's hesitation, Liam joined the hug. For a brief, perfect moment, Ethan felt a connection he'd never known he was missing. Then gently, he disentangled himself from the boys. Embrace. I have to go now, he said softly. But I promise you, I'm going to make things right. As he walked out of Harbor Hearts, Ethan's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. He had a lot of work to do, and not much time to do it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan. He threw himself into understanding every aspect of Montgomery Development's operations, particularly the gentrification projects that had led to the threat against Harbor Hearts. What he discovered left him feeling sick. The company he had built, the success he had chased so relentlessly, was built in part on the displacement of families just like Maya's. How had he let this happen under his watch? Meanwhile, Victor Langford was closing in. The SEC investigation was gaining momentum, fueled by the evidence Victor's team had uncovered. Ethan found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts, trying to save his company, while also working to undo the damage it had caused. You're taking too big a risk, Ethan, James Davidson warned during one of their late-night strategy sessions. If we back out of these development deals, we'll be vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Langford is just waiting for an opportunity like this. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting off a headache. I don't care about Langford right now. We need to find a way to save Harbor Hearts and the other community centers like it. It's the right thing to do. Davidson looked at him skeptically. Since when do you care about the right thing over profits? The question stung, but Ethan knew he deserved it. Since I realized what I've been missing all these years, he replied quietly. As the days passed, Ethan made cautious attempts to reconnect with Maya and the twins. He sent emails explaining his plans to save Harbor Hearts, but Maya's responses were curt and professional. The boys, however, were more receptive. Liam peppered him with questions about his work, while Noah shyly shared recordings of his latest guitar compositions. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Ethan stood before the Montgomery Financial Board of Directors, acutely aware of the hostility radiating from some of the members. Victor Langford sat among them, having maneuvered his way onto the board through some clever stock acquisitions. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. We're at a crossroads. The path we've been on has led us to this crisis. It's time for a radical change. He clicked a button, and the large screen behind him lit up with a logo, a stylized lighthouse over the words, Harbor Hearth Foundation. I propose we restructure Montgomery Financial. We'll maintain our core business, but a significant portion of our resources and profits will be redirected into this new charitable foundation. The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Victor leaned forward, a predatory grin on his face. Have you lost your mind, Montgomery? You'll tank the company's value? Ethan met Victor's gaze steadily. On the contrary, this move will not only salvage our reputation, but position us as leaders in corporate social responsibility. The Harbor Hearth Foundation will focus on community development, starting with underfunded areas in Brooklyn. For the next hour, Ethan laid out his vision, backed by meticulous research and projections. He spoke of tax benefits, positive press coverage, and most importantly, the real change they could effect in struggling communities. As he talked, Ethan couldn't help but think of Maya and the twins. He had invited them to the presentation, but hadn't received a response. He scanned the back of the room, hoping against hope to see them, but they weren't there. As the presentation concluded, the room fell silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was James Davidson who spoke up. I've known Ethan for years, he said, looking around the table. I've never seen him more certain of anything. I vote we give this a chance. The vote was close, but in the end, Ethan's passion and the promise of a restored public image won out. Harbor Hearth Foundation was greenlit, with the stipulation that Ethan would personally oversee its integration with their existing business model. As the board members filed out, Victor lingered. This isn't over, Ethan, he hissed. You're playing right into my hands. Ethan simply smiled. We'll see, Victor. We'll see. As he gathered his materials, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Maya. We saw the live stream. The boys are impressed. Maybe we can talk. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a glimmer of real hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but for once, he felt like he was on the right path. The weeks following the board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan threw himself into the creation of the Harbor Hearth Foundation with the same intensity he'd once reserved for high-stakes acquisitions. But this time, the drive came from a different place. A desire to make amends, to create something truly meaningful. Maya agreed to meet with him, bringing Liam and Noah along. They chose a neutral location, a small park near Harbor Hearts. As Ethan approached the playground, he saw the boys on the swings, with Maya watching from a nearby bench. "Hi," Ethan said softly, sitting down next to her. Maya nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes still on the twins. "They've been talking about you non-stop since the live stream," she said. "Liam wants to know everything about how you run your company. Noah's been practicing a song he wants to play for you." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Maya, I know I can never make up for the years I've missed, but I want to try. To be a part of their lives if you'll let me." Maya turned to look at him, her expression a mix of caution and hope. "It's not going to be easy, Ethan. They're not babies anymore. They have opinions, feelings. You can't just walk in and expect to be their dad overnight." "I know," Ethan replied. "I'm prepared to put in the work, to earn their trust, and yours." Their conversation was interrupted by Liam and Noah bounding over, full of energy and questions for Ethan. As he listened to Liam's ideas for a youth robotics program and Noah's passionate description of the music education initiative he wanted to start, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced in all his years in finance. The transformation of Montgomery Financial into a socially responsible corporation wasn't without its challenges. Victor Langford, true to his word, was relentless in his attempts to undermine Ethan's efforts. He leaked stories to the press questioning the sincerity of the company's change of heart, and worked behind the scenes to sow discord among the board members. Ethan found himself working around the clock, juggling the demands of the company with his growing involvement in Harbor Hearth and his tentative new relationship with the twins. There were missteps and misunderstandings along the way. One evening, exhausted after a particularly grueling board meeting, Ethan forgot about a promised video call with Liam to help with his science project. The disappointment in his son's voice when he called to apologize was a painful reminder of how fragile their newfound connection was. Maya, seeing Ethan's genuine efforts and struggles, slowly began to let down her guard. She agreed to let him take a more active role in the boys' lives, but made it clear that her priority was protecting them from any more hurt. "They're excited to have you in their lives," she told him one day as they watched the twins participate in a Harbor Hearth community cleanup event. "But they're also scared that you'll disappear again if things get tough." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm not going anywhere, Maya. I know I have a lot to prove, but I'm committed to this, to them, to you, to making a real difference here." As the months passed, Harbor Hearth expanded its programs, fueled by the resources of the Montgomery Foundation. New computer labs were installed, job training programs were launched, and a small business incubator was established to help local entrepreneurs. Ethan found himself spending more and more time in Brooklyn, drawn by the tangible impact of their work and the growing bond with his sons. Liam's robotics team, sponsored by Harbor Hearth, made it to the state finals. Noah's music program culminated in a community concert that left not a dry eye in the house. But even as things seemed to be falling into place, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Victor Langford was making his move, and the future of everything Ethan had built, both old and new, hung in the balance. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Victor Langford had called for an emergency board meeting, claiming to have evidence of financial improprieties in the establishment of the Harbor Hearth Foundation. The implication was clear. Ethan had used the foundation as a personal slush fund, funneling money away from shareholders for his own benefit. Ethan knew the accusations were baseless, but the damage to public perception was immediate. The company's stock plummeted, and reporters camped outside both the Manhattan office and Harbor Hearts, hounding employees and volunteers alike. Maya called him, her voice tight with worry. "Ethan, what's going on? There are reporters everywhere asking about you, about us. The boys are scared." "I'm so sorry, Maya," Ethan said, feeling the weight of his past decisions more heavily than ever. "I'll fix this, I promise. Just tell the boys I love them, okay?" As he prepared for the board meeting that could decide the fate of everything he'd worked for, Ethan realized that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. Yes, he wanted to save the company and the foundation, but more than anything, he wanted to protect his family, Maya and the boys, from the fallout of his corporate battles. The boardroom was tense as Ethan walked in, Victor's smug smile a stark contrast to the concerned faces of the other members. But as Victor began to present his evidence, Ethan felt a calm settle over him. He had spent years playing corporate chess, always 3 moves ahead. Now, it was time for his endgame. One by one, Ethan dismantled Victor's accusations, presenting ironclad documentation of every transaction, every decision made in the creation and operation of Harbor Hearth Foundation. But his masterstroke came in the form of testimony, not from financial experts or legal teams, but from the people whose lives had been changed by Harbor Hearth. Via video link, the board heard from students who had received scholarships, small business owners who had been saved from bankruptcy, and families who had found hope and community through the Foundation's programs. Among them were Liam and Noah, speaking eloquently about the impact their father's work had made on their neighborhood. As the testimonies concluded, Ethan stood to address the board one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've seen today is the true value of Montgomery Financial, not in stock prices or quarterly reports, but in lives changed and communities rebuilt. Victor's accusations aren't just false. They're a fundamental misunderstanding of what this company can and should be. He paused, looking each board member in the eye. I stand before you today, not just as the CEO of this company, but as a father, a member of a community, and someone who has learned the hard way what really matters in life. The choice before you isn't just about the future of Montgomery Financial. It's about what kind of impact we want to have on the world. The vote was unanimous. Victor Langford was removed from the board, his accusations dismissed. Montgomery Financial would continue its transformation, with the Harbor Hearth Foundation as a cornerstone of its new identity. As Ethan left the boardroom, physically and emotionally exhausted, he found Maya and the twins waiting for him. Without a word, they enveloped him in a group hug, right there in the corridor of power where he had once felt most at home. Looking at their faces, Maya's proud smile, Liam's excited chatter about the epic boardroom showdown, Noah's quiet but heartfelt, "We knew you could do it, Dad." Ethan knew he had finally found his true measure of success. 1 year later, Harbor Hearth celebrated its grand reopening in a fully renovated building. The community center had expanded, now occupying an entire block in Brooklyn. New programs had been added: job training, adult education, mental health services, all aimed at lifting the community. Ethan, Maya, Liam, and Noah stood together, cutting a giant ribbon as the crowd cheered. Ethan looked around at the faces, community members, volunteers, even some of his old Wall Street colleagues who had come to support the foundation. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Ethan found a quiet moment with Maya on the rooftop garden they built atop the center. "Can you believe how far we've come?" he asked, gazing out at the Brooklyn skyline. Maya smiled, leaning into him. "It's been quite a journey." Ethan turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Maya, I know we've taken things slow, rebuilding trust, focusing on the boys and the foundation, but I want you to know, I love you. I never stopped loving you. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for lost time." Tears glistened in Maya's eyes as she looked up at him. "Ethan Montgomery, are you proposing to me on a rooftop garden in Brooklyn?" He grinned, dropping to one knee and pulling out a small velvet box. "I believe I am. Maya Reyes. Will you marry me?" Her "yes" was lost in the sound of cheering. They turned to find Liam and Noah standing by the rooftop entrance, grins splitting their faces. As the newly engaged couple embraced their sons, Ethan felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. He had lost his way once, chasing a hollow version of success. But here, in Brooklyn, with Harbor Hearth below them and his family in his arms, Ethan Montgomery had finally found his true home. What did you think of the story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it, one to subscribe, if you haven't already, and another to watch other exciting stories. Make your choice. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.